they did not touch foreign exchange, because under the gold standard, foreign exchange rates were also very stable. But now this is changing, you know, this is after Keynes and after World War II, and the speculators find the great possibilities in some cases, or might even say in most cases, risk-free possibilities of bond speculation. So rather than having this randomness, or should I use vertical movement, okay, pushing up and down the rate of interest, but keeping it on the average reasonably stable, now we have push in one direction, which means down. In other words, they anticipate the central bank policy, and they know that periodically the central bank is making trips to the open market to buy its quota of government bonds. Oh yes, that's another thing which we should have pointed out. This is now the instrument of increasing the quantity of money, the main instrument. The open market purchases of government bonds. The central bank goes to the market and buys the bonds. It's usually the banks which own these bonds, and then they sell it to the central bank, and the central bank pays, as they say, out of thin air, with a check drawn on itself. This check will fatten the deposits of the member banks, and then the member banks will start scrambling. They have too much cash, and they want to put this cash to use, so they are going to make loans. And this is highly inflationary. Whereas, remember we discussed the real bills doctrine, drawing bills on commodities, on merchandise, emerging in production, goes side by side, goes parallelly, so that there is no inflationary effect, because at every point in time the increase in the quantity of money corresponds to an increase in the quantity of merchandise available for purchase by the consumer, or at least it's closer to the time when it becomes mature and saleable and ready for consumption. So this is now a brand new game, something which hasn't been experienced before, and therefore it is something of very great importance for the theoretician to study. And the presence of speculation, or the appearance of speculation in the bond market is going to distort the picture so much that any kind of preconceived model or ideas will be just irrelevant, and you have to analyze this situation on your own. So I have really discussed this earlier, but I think it's important enough that I bring up the topic again. And I do this by recalling that since the Roman legions during the Roman Empire were marching, and they were marching very often and very far, there was the manuals which the commanders of these legions had to follow, had a very important interdiction, very important, what would be another word for interdiction in English?
Standing order.
Standing order.
Standing order, that's correct, thank you. Standing order is that if the legion is crossing a bridge, then they must not keep
marching in lockstep.
In lockstep, yeah. This was banned. The interdiction referred to that when a bridge is being crossed, they must not march in lockstep. So there was an order, verbal order, which meant that they should just walk as without this lockstep. Now, why was this put in the manuals, and why was this enforced so rigorously? Because experience showed, somebody may want to finish my sentence.
You can induce.
That's right. Rudy, please. The pounding of feet, if they are simultaneous, then they could.
They create resonance that runs away, the bridge collapses.
That's right. Now, it doesn't always happen because you assume that the bridge has its own resonating frequency, but it doesn't have to be exactly that frequency. It could be a harmonic, which is a multiple. So there was a wide range of different frequencies. Of course, they didn't know which one it is, but they had to avoid that occurrence, and therefore the thing was that the pounding of feet had to be random. It could not be like that, because the outcome could be the collapse of the bridge, and of course the loss of the, or at least part, very serious damage to the legionaries. So this is since Roman times, and this is very well known. And every bridge construction since Roman times took this into consideration, that they try to estimate what this resonance frequency is and put it outside of the range of any, even if by accident, say a dozen people cross the bridge and by accident they move in lockstep, they have to avoid this because the same disaster could happen. Well, bridge engineers who were designing bridges learned their lesson very well. But I'm sorry to say, economists had no idea of resonance. They had no idea that bond speculators, when they start marching, they will march in lockstep. And as a consequence, this resonance feature could occur and would have disastrous results. And it had happened time and time again. And most often it happened in the sense of runaway prices and runaway interest rates, in both increasing more and more and more until the economic system collapsed. And this was a hyperinflationary collapse. And why these were more frequent than the deflationary extreme on the other side was that, in a way, war situation reinforced this. In wartime, of course, supplies of goods and production facilities could be and usually are destroyed, creating all kinds of shortages, and the shortages will push, of course, prices higher, and higher prices push interest rates higher, and then they start the catching up game, and this ultimately will bring the house down. So this is what had happened, but I'm sorry to say, economists did not learn the lesson. I don't think you find this title anywhere in the literature, economic resonance, but that's what is involved. The bond speculators, whether consciously or inadvertently, ultimately makes no difference whether it's conscious or not, but I am willing to give them the benefit of the doubt that they did not plan to bring a disaster to society, these bond speculators. They just saw an opportunity to make risk-free profits and they grabbed it. As was natural, this was their function, this was their mission to do. And in a normal, unfettered economy, this would always work and restore the balance. And if it didn't work in this extreme situation when the central bank had this operation policy, the open market operation, which initially was illegal, as I pointed out, only it was legalized retroactively. Very, very unfortunate decision. It should have been examined and studied from the point of view of economic resonance. It wasn't, so it was legalized, and it is happening time and time again. And that's not the fault of the individual bond speculator. Just like the rest of us tries to eke out a living and does what he or she normally does. And it is the system which is distorted so that normal economic activity could bring disaster. So this is what we have to say about this. The bond speculator creating this resonance. Right now, I see a greater danger for a deflationary collapse. And but my judgment is rather tentative. I cannot present a very convincing and very coherent argument. So much of that is a kind of intuitive feeling on my part that in the present situation, unless war breaks out, a serious war, such as, say, Iran or with North Korea or something like that, then it's deflation which is the main danger. That's the way I see it, and perhaps I'm wrong. I admit the possibility, and you can discuss it after the lecture. I don't mind any kind of objection to this insight, but presently I see this bond market bull, which started charging way back in 1981 or 82, so roughly it's 30 years ago, is still charging, still running. This last blip didn't convince me that it's all over. Now interest rate will stop falling and start rising. I think it will still continue, and it's anybody's guess how it will ultimately turn out, but I think there is a very great danger of a deflationary collapse, and that is something I see that it also happened in the 1930s, the Great Depression as we usually refer to it. That's the period between 1930 and 1939, the time war broke out in Europe. The United States joined only a couple of years later, but in Europe it was the start of the war, and if you look at a chart of the rate of interest, and this is in Jackson's paper, that chart I referred to, takes up the story to 1947, is very clear that interest rates were falling, and they were falling to levels which were unprecedented up to that point. Now, what happens today? Those records are all beaten. What kind of rates of interest we are having today are absolutely without precedent. 0 or 0.25, or in Japan it's even lower. And in Europe they tried, not terribly successfully, to keep interest rates higher. But you see, this is a very competitive field. So if there are big discrepancies between interest rates in two countries, then that will bring in all kinds of further speculation, which is known as the carry trade. It means that speculators borrow money where the rate of interest is low, and then lend money where the rate of interest is high. So this is a kind of bond arbitrage, and very, very tempting. And of course, when the extreme is reached, then all these trades will have to be reversed at the same time. And the market system is not designed to withhold such dramatic reversal as it would be in the case of that. So the danger is there, and it seems to me that the managers of the dollar, the managers of the euro, and the managers of other paper currencies just do not understand what is going on. What we are talking about would be completely alien to their thinking. They follow a couple of principles which may not be applicable. Of course, they follow the quantity theory of money, and then the precepts of Keynesianism and Friedman's theory. And that's about all there is to their repertory. And that's not sufficient by far to understand and analyze the situation we find ourselves. This is highly non-linear. Resonance is a highly non-linear phenomenon, but very important as we know. So the immediate outlook is not favorable. There is not much reason for optimism. These guys not only fight because They do not want their reputation to suffer that setback, but they also want to keep power. They have literally infinite power. The power to print money is an infinite power. This is certainly a power which is not in consonance with the US Constitution, which speaks about limited government power, limited power for anybody. Unlimited power is, of course, unlimited corruption, and that's what we have. Unlimited power breeds, as it were, unlimited corruption. So there is no hope that these guys, Bernanke included, would change his mind, say, oh, I'm sorry, we made a mistake. By the way, he did this once. Perhaps you recall that when Milton Friedman's 90th birthday was celebrated, there was a party, and a lot of people were invited in government, central bank, and also academia. Now, Bernanke at that time was not yet in the Fed, and he was not even, I think, an advisor to the president. He was not a member, I think, but he was the chairman of the Department of Economics at Princeton University, which is one of the more prestigious universities in the United States. I might even say the most important when it comes to economics. Certainly mathematics, Princeton is just no question that is tops. But I guess it's the same. They have this magnificent Woodrow Wilson building, beautiful high-rise building, white marble outside. And so anyhow, Bernanke was the head of the department. By the way, Paul Krugman was a member of that department at the same time. Now, anyhow, to make the long story short, Bernanke was at this birthday party. Milton Friedman is 90 years old, and there was congratulations and all that. And Bernanke made a speech, and in this speech, he said something to this effect, that you have criticized us. I'm sorry, perhaps he was already...
He was in the Fed.
He was already in the Fed.
He was in the Fed.
Yeah, because he talked about us. You, saying to Milton Friedman, you have criticized us, meaning the Fed, that we have, in the 1930s, made the money supply collapse by not pumping more money into the system, as your theory would have suggested. And we humbly accept belatedly your criticism, and we make a promise that we'll never ever do it again. And this was a solemn promise, and he lived up to it, and we are suffering from it ever since. So I would say Bernanke is fully capable of apologizing or admitting his past mistakes. But don't bet the family farm on this, that he will apologize for this type of mistake of printing too much money. He is ready to apologize any number of times that he has printed too little, but never too much. And that's what's happening, because now they are thinking about inventing a new name, because the name quantitative easing number 1, quantitative easing number 2 has got worn, it's threadbare, it's just, so they have to find a new name, and then bingo, let the printing presses work overtime and full steam ahead. But it's not doing what it's supposed to do. I mean, if anybody predicted the kind of quantity of money they have printed during the past 5 years, I mean, you would have been called insane. It's just not possible to print that much money. And if you compare it with the amount of money printed in Germany in 1923, in Hungary in 1947, and in Zimbabwe, whenever, these numbers are beating all records. But it's not happening. Why? Well, I think we have the answer, but unfortunately our time is up, so I'm not going to continue, but you can finish the story on your own. This is absolutely self-defeating, and it's contrary to purpose, this policy. And it is because they completely ignore the phenomenon of bond speculation. As if bond speculators did not exist. But they do. So they override whatever policy is made of the Fed. It's overridden by the speculators. And because they march in lockstep, all this keeps adding up until the deflationary edifice collapses. So with this I finish my lecture, and
we'll take a 15-minute break and have coffee in the interim. So thanks very much, Professor.
Thank